In Israel and Palestine, there's been a very wild and scary few days recently. I want to go ahead and break down the whole story for you. This is from Vice News. Tensions over Jerusalem's holiest site exploded into violence Friday, leaving at least 5 people dead and another in critical condition, stirring fear that greater violence could soon spread throughout the country. Protests were marred early Friday when an Israeli settler killed an 18-year-old Palestinian demonstrating in the Ras al-Amud neighborhood in East Jerusalem. In separate incidents later on, Israeli police killed 2 Palestinian protesters who were on the streets during clashes with Israeli forces. According to Palestinian health officials, and 2 Israeli settlers living in a West Bank settlement were killed in a stabbing attack, while the third remains in critical condition. Friday's outbreak in violence followed a series of tit-for-tat actions by Israelis and Palestinians, centering on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, known to Jews as the Temple Mount. Israel brought escalations to a boil by closing the mosque for Friday prayers last week and installing metal detectors. That decision came after 3 Palestinian militants, whom Israeli police spokesman Mickey Rosenfeld identified as terrorists, attacked a group of Israeli police officers guarding the mosque complex, killing 2 officers. All 3 attackers were killed in the shooting. A growing right-wing movement to allow open Jewish prayer at the site, which is currently barred by Israeli law, and ultimately build a Jewish temple there, has stirred worry among Palestinians who view the Al-Aqsa Mosque as a symbol of their national aspirations for a state and capital in East Jerusalem. Combined with Palestinian concern over changes to religious arrangements at the mosque complex, the introduction of the metal detectors has led to mass protests across the occupied Palestinian territories. In Jerusalem, Palestinians responded to the Israeli security moves with a boycott. The Waqf, the Jordanian Islamic authorities that manage the holy site, called on worshippers to reject Israel's measures by holding mass prayers on the streets of Jerusalem's old city. But many of the mass prayers quickly turned into nightly clashes with Israeli police. Palestinian authorities and protesters have remained steadfast throughout the week, calling for mass prayer and protests on Friday, the Islamic holy day. Thousands of Palestinians poured into Jerusalem's old city to participate, and Israeli security forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets, injuring at least 450 Palestinians, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. The protests have since spread from Jerusalem to other cities in the Palestinian West Bank, and the Palestinian militant group Hamas warned that Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem are red lines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held firm, vowing that the metal detectors would remain, despite Israeli army officials' request that he remove them to avoid greater unrest. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, meanwhile, announced that he will cut off all contacts with Israel over the metal detector dispute. So, here we go again. Now, usually when there's tensions like this that start in Jerusalem, it spreads over and then it leads to more violence. And then at some point, we're led to, just like what happened in 2014, a horrendous situation where the Israeli military basically did a slaughter fest in Gaza. And they killed 500 Palestinian children, over 2,000 people overall. I think over 80% of them were civilians, according to either Amnesty International or the United Nations. So these things rarely have a good ending. And I've seen some really stomach-churning video over this as well. There's circulating around social media. For example, there was one Muslim man who decided, I'm going to do my prayers here, here being like outside of the mosque and on the road where there was like protesting going on. So he begins his prayers, and an Israeli officer runs up and kicks the guy. Just assaults him while he's doing his prayers. And unfortunately, stuff like this is all too common, man. This is all too common. You see people who are under permanent occupation, subject to more and more of a crackdown, more and more rules. Now there's metal detectors at what's viewed as one of their holiest sites. But that's another huge issue with what's going on here, is the uber religiosity involved on both sides of that equation. So you really do have people fighting over this piece of land that they both view as incredibly holy sites. That's a recipe for a disaster. But that's one of the big portions of this, is these giant religious tensions. But then the other portion of it is, as we talk about all the time on this show, there's a permanent occupation going on, and the world just kind of sits by idly. I mean, at the UN, most countries have come to the proper conclusion, which is, hey, look, man, Israel, you got to stop it, and we got to come to the table and do a reasonable deal where you're giving Palestinians statehood, you're giving them independence, you're giving them their freedom, and you're ending the occupation. I mean, the occupation has been going on since 1967, you know? And what we have is the Palestinians, because they recognize that their situation is getting more and more dire, and they're losing more and more land, and the Israelis are building more and more settlements. They've been willing recently to just, okay, here, we'll give you this much more. We'll give you that much more. I mean, how many times have we discussed the deal that Jordan proposed on behalf of the Palestinians at the UN? Of course, Palestinians can't do it because they're not recognized by the UN. But Jordan proposed a deal. Hey, let's do the 1967 borders. Let's do the 1967 borders. Let's split up Jerusalem. Equal statehood for both. You know, as I've discussed, sometimes good walls make for good neighbors, and the religious differences among the ethnic differences between the Palestinians and the Israelis are so deep that I wouldn't have a problem with a giant wall there, that as long as the land distribution is fair. But this has basically been proposed by the Palestinians, and even Hamas agrees to the 1967 borders, and Israel goes, no, we are rejecting this out of hand. Fuck you mean you're rejecting it out of hand? No, they must come and negotiate directly with us. So they negotiate directly with them, and Israel goes, we don't agree to any of the things you want. Then they go to the UN, and they go, how dare you go to the UN? You have to negotiate face-to-face with us. But they did, and you said no to everything. Then they go to the UN, and you go, how dare you go to the UN? Then there are people who are desperate and react with violence. You go, oh my God, they're reacting with violence. How dare they? What do you want them to do? Then the last effort of people to free Palestine is what? Boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, BDS. And they go, ha, how dare you? What an anti-Semitic movement. Anti-Semitic movement? You say, hey, the only way you can resist is a nonviolent, peaceful protest movement. Well, what the fuck do you think BDS is? That's exactly what it is. Hey, if you don't give us, a state, and we don't get a reasonable deal here, we're going to do boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. So they're saying we're going to hurt you economically if you're not more reasonable. And they go, how dare you? That's anti-Semitic. So what's your stance? Their position is really just sit back and take it. Just sit back and take it, and every time we build a new settlement, we take more land, we come up with more draconian rules to further show to you that you're under occupation, more checkpoints, metal detectors, not letting you go into your own mosque at what you view as one of the holiest sites in Islam. Slapping them in the face, slapping them in the face, slapping them in the face, and then when there's a reaction, they go, oh, I can't believe that you reacted. It's just so stupid. So, look, we gotta... I mean, bottom line is, man, Israel needs to be forced to the table, and they need to be told, look, it's this or you're going to lose a lot. So it's a two-state deal in the 1967 borders, or you lose a lot. So the U.S. should stop giving you billions and billions of dollars and stop giving you so many weapons. So that's what the U.S. should do. They should threaten all that stuff. We'll just stop all the aid that you get immediately if you don't do a deal. That should happen. The international community should rally around BDS. And that's the only way to really get it done. Hey, it worked for apartheid South Africa. And what we have in Israel is an apartheid-like situation. I mean, that's what it is. It's permanent occupation, permanent oppression. And then now you have tensions boiling over as a result of what's happening there. And then also, as I told you, you had an Israeli settler kill an 18-year-old Palestinian demonstrating in the Ras Al Amud neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And then, as a response, you've had tit for tat as a response to that. We've been dancing around the issue for years and years and years, and the U.S.'s position is clear. We're going to pay lip service to the idea of peace, but then in our actions, we're going to say we're fine with permanent occupation. It's time to stop that, because we're sitting by as people's lives are being destroyed, their land is being taken, and they live under a grotesque occupation where they're subject to second-class citizenship and military checkpoints and a kind of life that you wouldn't wish on anybody, because they're certainly not free, they're certainly not independent, and the entire time that all that's going on, they're also accused of being barbaric savages who wouldn't be able to handle freedom, and they just need these benevolent occupiers to be there.